This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
"77 episodes of Play-by-Playcast in the books. Thanks as always for clicking subscribe and or download. Joining us once again here on a Friday morning, my name is Joel Godet. This is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. Hey, as always, you can interact with us on social media. You can find us at PXPcast, or you can find myself at Joel Godet, JoelGodett. And then, hey, if you get a couple of seconds and you're listening to this not in your car, because what I'm about to say would be unsafe if you were driving, throw us a rating or a review. It certainly helps continue to push the podcast forward, helps people notice it and find it, and algorithms and all that technical jargon that is way over my head. I just click publish. But if you have a second to throw some stars or leave a quick comment about the podcast, would really certainly appreciate that going forward, and got a couple of ratings added to the fold this past week. So if that was one of you, many thanks for doing that and expressing your continued interest in and support of the Play-by-Play cast. Quick nugget about previous episodes of the podcast as well. Our back catalog, all 76 episodes previous to this one, available and free to you on whatever device you're listening to this with, just by scrolling back through them. And it's always fun looking at the number of downloads on previous episodes, because even if you go back into the teens and the 20s and the 30s of this podcast, those episode numbers and their download numbers still continue to tick up. And it's neat to kind of see new people finding some of the old episodes as well. So even if you're new to the podcast and you've just listened to some of the more recent ones, or you're just here for this one with John Sciambi this week, do check out some of the early ones. I mean, way back to Carter Blackburn and Andy Nemetra, and Bill Hillgrove was an early one. Adam Amin and Joe Davis and J.B. Long and Matt Martucci, Eli Gold, all those guys that we had on in the very early episodes of the pod. Take a look at some of those as well. Kind of dive into everything. It's all there at your fingertips. Our guest today is from the realm of baseball, and it's ESPN's John Sciambi, and a guy that I have wanted to have on this podcast for some time now. We got Dan Schulman back in the winter. Now it's been a while. I have to scroll back through and find the back archive episode with Dan Schulman. It was episode 27. Oh, goodness. It was last winter. It's been almost a full year since we had Dan Schulman on. All right. Comes full circle. We had Dan on, and that was an awesome conversation, I guess, last December, and have wanted to have John Sciambi, Boog Sciambi, on for the longest time on this podcast. Also, for the longest time, I didn't know how to reach out to him. I didn't have an email, didn't have a phone number. A lot of the people on this podcast I've either had previous relationships to, or I'm just really good at Google stalking, and I've found ways to get in touch with them. Or PR people have helped out. For John, none of those things was an option. So I just tweeted at him. I did the shameless thing, and I just tweeted at him. So if you follow us on Twitter, you could all see that there was a point in time where we lobbied to get John Sciambi on the podcast, and he very gratefully and quickly obliged. And then that happened to be like the end of the baseball season. So for obvious reasons, he was a little busy, and we didn't get a chance to sit down until just this past week. And incredible amount of thanks to him after the fact. He was dealing with a little bit of a cold, and I got him to talk to me on the phone for 45 minutes for this podcast. And as you can hear now, I feel like I'm dealing with something. I sound like Froggy right now from the Little Rascals. So apologies for my vocal quality on the open of this podcast as well. But John is a good guy to talk to, certainly, for obvious reasons, from a baseball standpoint. And we dive into a lot of the mechanics of calling baseball, and he gets into some really interesting things that are incredibly insightful and that I'd never heard before when it comes to calling a baseball game. And that probably says more about me than anything else. But he'll break down some of the kind of his basic mechanics of what is important to him in broadcasting a baseball game. He'll talk about his preparation and the way that he interacts with players and the way that he, I don't want to say gets information because it sounds so cold and callous that way, but gets information. The way that he's been able to develop relationships with the players and again, this sounds cold, but and mine information and stories and anecdotes that help him do his job better. And then John's also a big guy in analytics. Not analytics, sabermetrics. I want to make sure I get that correctly, and we'll get into, the exact definition of sabermetrics here. John is big on sabermetrics and the understanding of baseball in different ways and through different statistics. And we have the discussion about factoring all that stuff in to a broadcast and doing it in a fun, informative, digestible manner. So a lot of different topics, a broad range of things to touch on with John Sciambi today. But we start with his rise in the industry. And it was an interesting one. And I didn't know this about him, but he was a guy that right out of college went the talk show route and quickly found out that his heart was in play-by-play. And, took a shot and went out to Boise, Idaho, and did minor league baseball. And then one thing leads to another, and he winds up on the crew of the then Florida Marlins, and then he winds up doing games on television for the Atlanta Braves, and then winds up full-time at ESPN in 2010, where he has been ever since. So he will start on that conversation and climbing up the ranks of his profession and our profession to the ultimate point of where he is now, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty on this week's Play-by-Playcast with John Boog Sciambi.
So at BC, I worked at a student radio station, WZBC, and called games and did sports talk stuff. At that point in my career, I really wanted to be a sports talk show host. I wanted to be something more like Mike and the Mad Dog in that range. I grew up in New York City and, listening to WFAN. So that probably influenced me. When I got out of school, I went and worked for a company called Sports Ticker, which ESPN eventually bought, but it was a forerunner. Basically, it's the Crawl. It was a company that would just take in scores. And so I worked there, and then from there, after about 6 months, I ended up going to work out at a station, WESB, and it was where I grew up. Somebody knew someone and heard about an opening, and I went to this station and basically did everything. I did news, sports, weather, DJ, board up Pirates games. Bradford is the home of the Zippo lighter factory. So there you go. So I did that. And then from there, I got some help from one of my BC classmates. Bob Wischusen was down in Miami at an all-sports radio station. And he helped get me a job as, a producer. And eventually, pretty much right away, I got to do updates. So I went down to Miami and stayed on his couch for a little while. And that's sort of how it progressed in Miami. And from there, I got my own talk show eventually. During my free time, I would go to Marlins games and do games into a tape recorder. And I eventually put a tape together, got to Boise, Idaho, did that, then came back to South Florida, got the Marlins job, and then it's kind of gone from there.
At what point in all of that did you say, like, if you're in Miami, you're working in sports radio in a fairly major market, do you say, I want to start doing play-by-play more, and then B, I'm going to go to Boise, Idaho to do it?
Well, I just think that baseball has always been a passion for me. I just wasn't satisfied. Talk was great initially, and then I just was looking for something else. As far as going to Boise, it was as great an experience as I have ever had. However, I still can remember landing in Boise, Idaho, and they weren't gonna pay a ton. This is about getting the experience, but a part of the country that I had never been to, and waiting for someone was coming to pick me up after I had landed, and just being there in a pretty much empty in an empty portion of the airport, just standing there going, what have I done? And but it was a spectacular experience. Boise was a great town, and the Northwest League was amazing.
What'd you learn in that year?
I wasn't very good. It's hard, you every announcer finds it out, but you just, the best way I would describe it is, whether you like baseball or not, it's a slow game that can get really fast in a hurry. And that, I would say, is, what I experienced. But, and beyond that, just traveling through the league and learning stuff. Had a great manager. The manager of the team was Tom Kochman, who's,
Casey's dad, right?
Casey Kochman's father, who, operated at that time as a scout and a manager for the Angels organization.
How did you get better? And what was the realization process like of, I've taken this gamble, I've come out here to Boise, Idaho, I need to get better. Right now I'm not very good. Where do I go? What do I do? How does it all unfold?
Well, I think that I knew that I was getting better throughout the year. I know that during that season, and look, most guys, nowadays, when, they do it and they travel, and at that level, most of the time, it's just one dude. I know for me, my partner went away, and there was a weekend series that I did by myself. And I think 2 of the games went 12 innings or something like that. And it was, and you're just solo, and you start to feel like you can handle it a little bit more. Yeah, it was basically just reps is really the answer to how you get better. And but I don't think I had a real, I don't think I had a real perspective on how much I'd grown with it, I guess.
How'd you wind up getting back to Miami?
Well, that was the plan all along. That I was fortunate in that the radio station had sort of granted me a bit of a sabbatical to come back and still do my talk show and that type of thing.
Would you have done it otherwise? Or was that, just kind of everybody's kind of story has those interesting twists and turns, and that seems like one of those like twists of fate that helps you out in the long run.
It certainly helped me out, but yeah, I would have gone.
Okay.
I was down to go jump into the deep end of the pool and just figure it out. So I would have, but it was that was helpful to be able to go back there. And then, basically the way it worked was, at the time, Wayne Huizenga owned the Marlins and the Panthers, eventually Marlins, Panthers, and Dolphins. And I had done some of the Panthers radio pregame, intermission, and postgame prior. And the guy that helped me out a lot was Dean Jordan. He was the director of broadcasting with the Marlins, and basically that job opened up with the Marlins as they were changing their broadcasting structure up, so that now it was going to be their 4 broadcasters were going to split. Tommy Hunt was going to stay on TV, and one of their TV, or they'd have a play-by-play guy on radio and a play-by-play guy on TV that would swap. And then the 4th position was a radio-only pregame, postgame, in-game scores, a little bit of color in-game, and, a tiny bit of play-by-play.
I want to dive into some of kind of the wonky side of broadcasting too, but I want to ask you one more thing, career path-wise as well, in terms of the way all of that plays out. And we've had this conversation a couple of times in really recent weeks on the podcast also. The kind of split way of going about rising up in the industry of, being a guy that's going to go, to go start in Boise and stay in Boise in a couple of years and climb those ranks versus, having been in Miami and being in a big market and being around, and then you're doing pre and post, and then that eventually leads to you can find your way to a play-by-play job at a major league level by not necessarily having one right away, but still by being there. What are the benefits to, I guess you've kind of seen it from both angles. What are the benefits to both sides of that?
Yeah, it's hard. I feel for the guys that, go and do the jobs and then feel like they're just waiting for somebody to pluck them out. I do think that being around, it's unfortunate because there are plenty of guys that are doing it who are good enough. And that's part of what you're looking to do, is that you want to, go to the minors and get better. But then there's also being near a market so that you can be heard, so that there's some familiarity. Because I think it is now probably a little harder to just get found in that regard. So, it was definitely, the way it worked out for me was an advantage to have the ability to go to the minors and then go back to a major market and be around, a major league broadcasting situation. So it's, I don't know. And I would suspect that the path is, and there are plenty of things that are just different now about the process than, what I did back then. And look, truth be told, and I got really lucky because when I came back, the Marlins were changing their broadcasting situation.
Sure.
And it just, the timing worked.
What makes baseball good on television, or what makes good baseball television?
Look, the way I'm trying to do it is I want it to be fun. I want it to be interesting. I want it to be smart. I would say those would be the 3 things I'm looking for on television. Everybody does it differently. At ESPN, more often than not, we're doing a 3-man booth. I'm someone, I like the Bill James stuff and the sabermetric stuff and know it fairly well, at least for a long time, and those concepts. And, I like to get in the mix and get my hands dirty a little bit. So I'm not shy about, wrestling on concepts and that type of thing. But, my main job there is to try and humanize players and engage the analysts.
How do you, I read the baseball prospectus, kind of, I guess, op-ed that you had written in terms of the sabermetrics and the mathematical side of things. And you talked about the fact that, you're mathematically challenged and, you have to be able to break it down. How do you do that and make it fun? Because, numbers inherently, like, I'm in the same boat, not fun. But what's the right way to do it and the right way to convey it to make it interesting, to help people learn and to do it so, we and they don't get lost?
Well, look, I still would say that there's kind of a misconception about sabermetrics has a definition. It's the search for objective knowledge about baseball. And so I don't think that everybody realizes what constitutes sabermetrics. You know what I mean? It's not just WAR and FIP and stuff like that. It's not just stats. Like informationally, when you're getting good, interesting information out there, that works. As it relates to advanced stats, I truly still, you go back to that piece that I wrote, I still would say, whereas it's grown, I think the starting place is still the same, and that is it begins with what you're not including, what you're not doing, avoiding the noise, meaning staying away from pitcher wins and RBIs as a way to demonstrate this guy is good. Meaning, like, just something as simple as this. We're not so now not doing. Here's a stat, here's a graphic of this is who's led the major leagues in wins the last 5 years. Not that you're, the top 5 guys. Not that you're not going to find good pitchers on there. It's just that you don't want to imply that this is how you should think in order to find a good answer. Or here's the 5 guys that have led the league in RBIs the last 5 years. So avoiding the noise is the first thing. And then when you get good information, being able to pass it along. And, I still would say that, the basic offensive concepts of on base and slugging correlating the most to run scoring. And, again, pushing across the idea that offense is about not making outs first and foremost. That's how the game works. So it's hard. And it's my judgment how as to how to do it. Now you have StatCast and all that stuff, and engaging the audience that way, I think is important as well.
Can it almost make for better television sometimes? If you're working with an older school guy, to have that conversation about, what is true and what pictures numbers can paint, so that it's not just, here's sabermetrics and here's why it matters, but you're actually not just convincing the viewer at home, but you're convincing the people that are sitting around you. If that makes sense.
It can be interesting, but I'd also say, again, back to the definition, the one part of it is, I guess I've kind of arrived at, look, offensively, they've got it nailed down pretty well. And there's just, I guess what I'm saying is that there's a lot of stuff that we've gotten to that it's pretty well objective. You know what I mean? Like, sure. You can't sit there and there's 2 guys with a 150 point difference in OPS, and you're going to try and say that one of them's pretty close to the same player because he knocked in 7 more runs than him. You know what I mean? It's like you just don't get to say it's not so. You just can't push that one. So yeah, at times it makes for good wrestling matches. Look, if you want an example on the air, when we talk bunting, if we really get into the weeds, like, yeah, I'm a dork. I have a run expectation table on my computer. I have the, how many runs you're expected to score and what percentage of the time you're expected to score. And, if I'm working with certain guys who are a fan of the bunt, I am absolutely going to, break it out and explain, look, here are the situations where you're actually increasing your ability to score, and here are the situations where you're not.
That's actually really interesting. from that standpoint. The human aspect of it as well. I want to go to the Chipper Jones story with the first pitch fastball.
Right.
How do you, and this goes to the numbers and then bringing in the storytelling side of it. How do you broach that subject with Chipper to go up to him and begin that conversation by like saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't swing at the first pitch so often?
Yeah, see, first of all, I didn't – it was never you shouldn't swing at the first pitch so often.
Okay.
That's the first thing. I mean, I traveled with the team. Chipper was amazing to talk to about hitting, just so smart. His recall was incredible. He was very well thought out about all of the things that he did. So when I would, so basically in spots, I would just, sometimes I would go and talk to him about specific things, and sometimes we just chat. But I'd also at times just find information and then, want him to react to it. And that was really more what I was doing there, because I knew he would have a thought for me. I knew that he'd have a reason why he's swinging at first pitch fastballs so much, or swinging at the first pitch so much. And it was, it was funny, but again, I had a good relationship with him, and, I'd sit there and just, you talk about humanizing. That group was fun. And, I was sitting there one day, well, not sitting there, but I was in the Braves clubhouse one day, and Chipper and Smoltz are playing backgammon, and they play each other a lot. And it was just fun. And I'd sit there standing over them and just talking with the two of them. And one day, and they're both super competitive. And one day Chipper is behind big in backgammon, and I think rolls double sixes 38 consecutive times. And he basically comes all the way back and pretty much comes close to finishing it out. And when he rolls whatever he needed to roll, I mean, pumps his fist like I've never seen before. I've never seen him be that emotional on the field. And they were great to me again. So he, he's just going crazy. And I was like, dude, I said, I've never seen you get that fired up on the field. What's the deal? And he just he thinks for a second, and he points at Smoltz and he goes, what can I say? He's my New York Mets.
That's really good. What is it? The answer to this question is probably like.
And the other thing that I loved about Chipper,
Chipper
was the type of guy that he let me use it on the air. So it was just tongue in cheek. So but it was just a great line, and that's the type of stuff that you're searching for every day to just give you a little bit of flavor of what the guy's like and what, that puts you right there in the clubhouse when you get to tell that story.
That's what I'm curious about. And that's what I was going to say. The answer is probably just be genuinely interested and be a good person. But how do you put yourself in the situations where, in that spot, you're in their domain and they're playing backgammon and how do you put yourself in the right place to be able to glean knowledge, information, but also cultivate true relationships with people where you can kind of do your job the best way possible?
It's different in different settings. In that setting, I would say that's easier to do because you're with the team all the time.
Sure.
And they're used to you. So, and I think that was my second year there. So I think it's a little different when you're traveling with a team. Your ability to get in there with the home team is right there in front of you. In terms of how do you do it, unfortunately, I'm old. I've been doing it for a while now. So you meet people and someone who knows someone, and guys start to know who you are. And you get an idea for who's a good talker, who's not a good talker. But it can be as simple as this. I was doing the Indians over the weekend for radio late in the season, and it was during their winning streak. And I want to say they'd won 16 or 17 in a row. And I know Jason Kipnis a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. But as I'm leaving the locker room, I see him and I stop him and I say, hey, Kip, he was on the disabled list at the time. He had a hamstring issue. And so they'd won, I think, 17 straight. I said, hey, Kip, how you feeling? He said, yeah, good. I did all my running. Said, I feel pretty good. I said, well, when do you think you'll be back? He said, honestly, I think I'll be full go, in a day or two. And then he pauses, gets a big smile on his face and goes, but I ain't coming back until they lose because I'm not letting them put that shit on me. And, and I burst out laughing and, can I curse? I just cursed.
You can. It's a podcast where you're good.
I figured as much.
Yeah, there's no FCC.
So, you know what I'm saying? Like, you just kind of wander into that one. But sometimes it's.
Where do you strike the balance of what you'll use in that situation versus just developing rapport with players?
In that spot, I will laugh and I'll say, I'm going to use that, okay? He's like, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And there are times where, when you get a casual comment like that, you just, I'll ask, is it okay if I use that or tell that story? That's how you're looking to do it. And there's a million different things. There's stuff. I'll give you a good one that I had, and this was fun. I've had over the years. I had some great interactions with David Ortiz, but one, and this ended up working really well. But I was doing a Sunday night game on the radio. It was in Detroit, Red Sox, Tigers, and Tigers are winning most of the game. I think 8th inning. Late in the game, Ortiz hits a huge homer off of Jabba Chamberlain, and the Red Sox win. And so after the game, I'm walking past the TV trucks, and I have the Red Sox for Wednesday Night Baseball in Baltimore for TV that week. But as I'm going past the TV trucks, I see Duke Thorne, who is one of the camera guys for Sunday Night Baseball. He's actually, at the time, he was the guy that worked the handheld, that followed the guy who followed the pitchers, followed the guy that, as he's rounding third, hitting the homer. You see the camera guy running alongside him.
Sure. So
that was what Duke did. So after the game, Duke says, "Oh, I got to tell you this story." So Ortiz, and because he's on the field, he talks to all the guys. Like they get to know who he is. And Ortiz said to him pregame, "Hey man, when I hit the homer tonight late in the game, I'll go slow for you so you can film me." And when it was done, he looked at Duke and said, "Did I go too fast for you?"
That's good.
So, and when I, but something like that, that's Duke telling me. So then when we did the Wednesday night game, I went up to him and I said, "Can I use that?" Like asked Ortiz, "Can I tell that story?" And he said, "Yeah."
What's different, all of that being said, for being the Braves guy or working with the Marlins, and then just helicoptering in and doing a one-off on radio or a one-off on a Wednesday night?
Well, look, national baseball coverage during the year, it's just different. I think that, the first thing that I would say is that, when we just parachute in to do the Indians and the Red Sox, I think the first thing that I would say is you're just kind of, it's going to be mainly Indians and Red Sox fans, but you also kind of need to go broad strokes. So I think that there's an aspect of it where you come in and say, you're basically trying to explain, this is who this team is. This is what they're good at. This is what they're not as good at. And then specific concepts in terms of, this is an Indians team that doesn't throw as a pitching staff. They don't throw the fastball frequently. They're very, statistically, they throw the cutter more than any team. They throw the curveball more than any team, and it's by design. So they basically are coming after you, as they like to say, with spin right out of the gate. So you will talk concepts and stuff like that. So I just think it's different. It's a little more when you're in it every single day. It's like a daily story, and I think that with the National, you're kind of trying to bring a little broader perspective.
What's prep like for a national game in that regard, and being able to, the way baseball works, particularly on television, being able to carry a story over the course of 3 hours and know you've got a lot of different things to go to, but at the same time not inundate people. And can you kind of walk me through your prep of a Wednesday night game?
Yeah, look, we do a lot of the same teams.
That's true too. Yeah,
it's just the way it is. So you get into June, got a pretty good idea. You're going to see the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Dodgers, the Cubs, and the Cardinals a lot. It's just those teams you're going to see a lot. And then but I think that in the overall, my prep is it's going to be pitcher centric if there's something that stands out about the pitcher, and then really going through strengths and weaknesses of the team, and then if there are interesting storylines relative to specific players or stories that we want to tell. So we had one that went well. We did a Marlins Cardinals game in Miami, and I think mid-May this past year. And while I was prepping for the game, the first things that you'll do is, so if you were you're looking at the Marlins. Okay, so the first thing I would, where do they rank in runs per game? Where do they rank in on base? Where do they rank in slugging? So like that, those are the things the first thing you're going to look at. So, and I'm just making this up, but so they're ninth in runs per game and eighth at on base and 10th in slugging. So they're probably an average to slightly below, with park effect, probably average-ish offensive team. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what you're processing in that spot. But then you're looking through some things, and Tom Kohler was starting that night. Tom Kohler, one of the things that they talked about with him is how he wraps his wrist behind his body. And just looking at his mechanics, I sent video to Rick Sutcliffe, who was really the classic wrist wrapper. He had that unique way of taking the ball, kind of behind his back and like curling up his wrist, and wanted to see if there was anything there. And he liked it. And so in game, we did a side by side of Kohler and Sut. And, for Kohler, they look at the wrist wrap as being problematic. And in the piece that we did, Sut really explained how mechanically he could make it work if he adjusted something. So there's just a million different things that you're going to run into and try and do. And sometimes it's launch angle, and sometimes it's talking to Matt Carpenter about how he changed in his career, that you find something that that those are the guys that are interesting to talk to. So Matt Carpenter says, I didn't want to be a guy who hit 300 with a 330 on base and slugged 440. I want to hit, 275. I want my on base to be 400, and I want to slug like 510. So I had to change, the way I went about things. And then you go talk to Matt Carpenter, and you're going to hit on that. Or doing the Nationals, talking to a guy like Daniel Murphy. So there's just there's a million different ways that you go, but you want to emphasize some of the personalities and then, statistical stuff as well.
Do you do you notebook that, or how
Yeah.
much chicken scratch is in your scorebook, and how do you organize it all?
So I mean, I have that'll be on my card. That type of stuff will be on my card. There's at this point on my card, there's numbers, notes, and then there's also shorthand code that will remind me of a story that I have. I mean, that's basically how I do it. So
gotcha. The actual mechanics, if I can go back to a thing you said earlier, slow game that gets fast in a hurry.
Yep.
What's the best way to handle that from a broadcasting perspective? And I guess that's more of a radio question. But baseball can catch you off guard, and there's a lot that goes into that just in terms of using your instrument and being able to control your voice the right way. And what's your approach to that?
So the first thing that I would say is the best way to consistently avoid, it's the best piece of mechanical advice that I ever got for doing radio play-by-play was from John Miller. And it's still something that I use, and it's really subtle, but anytime I'm critiquing young broadcasters, I pass this piece of information along all the time, and that is, it all begins with when and how you begin the play. And the biggest and most important piece is that I'm a believer in, I think that you should consistently be telling me when the play starts. And the play starts when the pitcher starts to pitch. So I'm not saying never, but I'm not a fan of you and I just having a conversation, there's a ball outside, and that we're just talking, swing and a miss, and that the conversation keeps happening, that's in the dirt, 2-1. You know what I mean? Like, what I want is, here comes the pitch. Here's the 2-1. Right-hander turns on the rubber, kicks and deals. I want that every time, or as much as possible. And also with that, and this is the most important thing, though, you want to say, here's the pitch, before you think you do. And the reason for that is because of how hard they throw the ball, you can't say, here's the pitch in sync with the pitcher pitching, because the ball gets there faster than the words come out of your mouth. So what you want is, sound-wise, you want to be saying, here's the pitch, almost before the pitcher releases it, so that you're using the sounds. Because if you synchronize, here comes the 2-1 with the pitcher releasing the ball, the TCH and the ball hitting the bat are all happening as one sound. But if you do it ahead of where you need to do it, then the way it should sound is, here comes the 2-2, crack, swing and a ground ball to short. Shortstop moves to his left, gathers it in, throws to first, 1 out. Do you understand what I'm saying in terms of the sound?
100%.
So not only, so the first thing that executes is you're hearing the sounds of the park, as opposed to the bat crack being underneath your voice. You want that tiny bit of space. If you have Jim Joyce behind the plate, it's Verlander winds it up and fires, and then you get the ball hitting the mitt, and in a big league, well-mic'd park, you hear "hey" from Jim Joyce. So like that's the type of stuff you're looking to do. The other thing, though, is that when you say, here's the 2-1 or here's the pitch ahead of it, to allow for that space, it puts you in a better timing position to call the play. So now here's the kick in the 2-2, and then you hear the ball hit the bat, and now you can describe the play. So that it's when you're trying to synchronize calling the pitch with the pitcher throwing, it's easier to get into a place where you're chasing the play. So that, to me, that's mechanically the biggest the biggest piece of advice that I think can help broadcasters is, I think that just their time, just focus on the pitcher and get that timing synced up and start the play and go from there. And again, it's my opinion. So, everybody's got a different one. Be conversational. Don't go too fast. But I think that everything really emanates from that place and getting that timing correctly. Because when it sounds good, you want to hear, that you want to hear Arrieta rocks and fires, and then you hear the ball hit the bat, and then the crowd starts to rise, and you start to describe the play. You're using all the sounds,
I'm glad we went down that road because that was an awesome answer. So I appreciate you sharing that one with me. Anything else while I'm on that, just mechanically, that comes to mind in terms of broadcasting? That is, and you said that was the one thing that John Miller told you that you always rely on to other people. Is there anything else that I might not hit on that always comes to mind when you talk about broadcasting with people?
I don't think so. To me, that is because everything flows from there.
Yeah,
so
that's the first domino.
That's right. And so, the rest of it is you find your style. But radio wise, you're trying to describe. Again, there are different things, but you're trying to paint the picture. So there's just, I think that you want to give guys movement. Like one of the things that I would say is just once you start to get comfortable, then you begin to add little details that, again, you're trying to really, you're trying to make people picture, what it is that's happening. So, when Mike Trout comes to the plate, you still, everybody knows he's a right-handed hitter, but at some point I might say, big right-handed hitter digs in. You know what I mean? It's just because you're trying to cue them thinking about Mike Trout at the plate, or even just a routine ground ball to second base is something that you can play with that, almost it's really rare that somebody gets a ground ball hit at them that they don't take that there's no lateral movement. So the types of things that you can do that, to describe is, on routine ground balls, give the fielder some movement and add some description. So swinging a ground ball right at the second baseman, Altuve, step to his left, reaches down, picks it up, just adding that extra detail of takes a step to his left. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That you just throw in there. But I would say, again, don't do too much. And just, be focused on describing and it's hard. You're inclined to want to jam information in. And we all have good stuff that, you want to get in there, but you want to just make sure your pace and your timing is on point before you start to try and stuff things into the broadcast.
I'll if I can wrap things full circle here with you and bring you back to the beginning, and I'll end on this note. I'm a Syracuse guy, so we shine WAER quite a bit on here. But I want to go back to WZBC for you. Were you in school with Wischusen and Tess at the same time?
I was, yeah.
First off, was the Tess effect a thing when he was in college?
Not that I'm aware of. But
did you know kind of that this might, or is it kind of neat to look back on, or I guess what was that trio like in school?
Yeah, it's neat to look back on. I mean, at the time, the way we knew each other was that there was a Monday night sports talk show that, we all would participate in. And, we had a passion for sports. We were all friends. And then, Bob and I were roommates in Miami. I can't sit here and tell you that I knew then that we were going to, go on and do what we've done. But it was, it was a passionate group. That's for sure. The other guy that was actually, I guess, a year below was I don't believe he's in the business anymore, but he worked on the Red Sox broadcast for a while. John Risch, on the radio side, and did a little bit of TV, was there with us as well. But yeah, I would love to tell you that I knew that we were all gonna make it, but I just think I can tell you that I think that one of the things, and I guess in the end it served me, but it never occurred to me that I might not be good enough. I was just such a huge sports fan, and I worked hard in terms of trying to learn stuff. And I was a baseball junkie. I was someone that subscribed to Baseball America back when, back in the day. So you're, talking, and I would have Alan Simpson on the, on the talk show to talk about like the draft and stuff like that. Like I was a dork. So I don't think we really knew that it was going to turn out like this.
Has Wade Davis, at least, does he know who you are yet? Has that?
So I never posted it, but I ended up going to, I was at spring training last year, and I was walking past this one area, and literally I come face to face with Wade Davis, and he just gets this giant smile on his face, and he's just like, "What's up, man?" And Sutcliffe, I don't know whether he was there that day, but we took a selfie and sent it to Sutcliffe that day. So, yeah, we're good.
Awesome. John, this was awesome. It was fun to pick your brain, and I don't know what I can do to repay the favor, but I really appreciate you spending some time with me and doing this week.
Yeah, man, absolutely. My pleasure.
That's John Sciambi joining us here on Play-by-Playcast. I was fired up to be able to do the interview with Boog this week, and I can't thank him enough for taking the time to do it. One of those guys that got the random message from me saying, "Hi, I'm Joel. I've got a podcast. Do you want to come talk about your life?" And he said yes. And I'm forever grateful to those people that don't know me or this platform from Adam, but that continue to come on and allow me to pick their brains and allow all of us to learn something from them as well. And by the way, if you've never seen the video clip that we referenced at the very end there with Rick Sutcliffe and Wade Davis talking, and Suddy saying, got in a fight with John Sciambi who would win, and Wade Davis says, "Who's John Sciambi?" And the clip is priceless because they just show Boog sitting in the booth, deadpan, while Eduardo Perez and Rick Sutcliffe are losing their minds with laughter. So if you're kind of in the dark about that, last question and the fallout thereafter, it's on YouTube, so you can check it out. Just if you search John Sciambi, it'll pop up. So make sure you do yourself a favor and check that out and get your laugh for the week, I guess. Again, though, many thanks to John Sciambi for doing this. I'm going to go before I continue to sound more and more like Froggy, because I've got a broadcast tomorrow, and I pity the poor souls that are fans of IUPUI and Ball State that are going to have to listen to this sound for 2 hours tomorrow. So rest up the vocal cords, and hope that all of you have great weekends broadcasting as you guys venture off to wherever your broadcasting travels may take you this week. And then we will see you back here next week for another edition of Play-by-Playcast. My name is Joel Gadet. Many thanks to John Sciambi. See you next Friday right back here on iTunes or Stitcher with PXPcast. Hit it, Marshmallow. We're out.